I'm writing this from a motel room somewhere in the Midwest, paid for in cash, using a laptop I bought off Craigslist that's never been connected to any of my real accounts. I've been running for 6 weeks now, and I don't know if I'll ever be able to stop. My name is Alex Brenner, or it was, before I had to become someone else, and I need to tell someone what happened before it's too late. If something happens to me, at least this story will be out there. I'm 31 years old, and up until 2 months ago, I was a penetration tester, which is a fancy way of saying I was a professional hacker. The legal kind. Companies would hire me to try to break into their systems, find vulnerabilities, and report back so they could fix the security holes before actual criminals exploited them. It was good work, well-paying, and I was really good at it. I'd been doing it for about 8 years, working for various security consulting firms, building a reputation in the industry. I'd done penetration tests for banks, hospitals, tech companies, government contractors, pretty much every type of organization you can imagine. I had a perfect track record, I'd never failed to find a way in, and I'd never violated the ethical boundaries of the work. I'd been offered jobs by some sketchy people over the years who wanted me to do actual cybercrime, but I'd always turned them down. I liked being on the right side of the law. In early March of this year, I got an email from a recruiter about a unique opportunity. A company called Meridian Solutions, based in Seattle, was looking for a senior penetration tester for what they described as an executive-level security assessment. The pay they were offering was astronomical, nearly 3 times my usual rate for what they said would be a 2-week engagement. I'd heard of Meridian Solutions. They were a mid-sized defense contractor, doing cybersecurity work for various government agencies and military branches. They had a reputation for being somewhat secretive, which made sense given the nature of their work, but they were legitimate and well established. The recruiter explained that Meridian had recently experienced some concerning incidents that suggested their security might be compromised. They wanted someone with my background to do a comprehensive assessment of their systems, and this was the unusual part, they wanted it done as a blind test. Meaning I'd be given minimal information upfront and would need to find vulnerabilities the same way an actual attacker would, through research and reconnaissance. The job would require me to relocate to Seattle temporarily, work on site at their facility, and sign an extensive NDA covering everything I discovered during the engagement. Standard stuff for defense contractor work, though the NDA was more comprehensive than most I'd seen. I took the job. Why wouldn't I? The money was incredible, the challenge sounded interesting, and Meridian was a legitimate company. I gave notice at my current contract, sublet my apartment in Portland, and drove up to Seattle in late March. Meridian's offices were in a nondescript office park in Bellevue, just outside Seattle proper. The building was modern, all glass and steel, with security that was immediately impressive. Badge readers at every door, cameras everywhere, man-trap entrances that prevented tailgating, security guards who actually paid attention. This was a company that took physical security seriously, which suggested their digital security would be equally robust. Good. I liked a challenge. I met with the CISO, Chief Information Security Officer, on my first day. His name was Robert Huang, mid-50s, former NSA, exactly the kind of person you'd expect in that role at a defense contractor. We met in a secure conference room that I was pretty sure was designed to prevent electronic eavesdropping. "Mr. Brenner, thank you for joining us," Robert said, shaking my hand firmly. "I've read your background, and I'm impressed. You come highly recommended." "Thank you. I'm looking forward to the challenge." "Good, because this won't be easy." He slid a folder across the table to me. "Here's what we're authorizing you to do. In short, everything. We want you to try to break into our systems using any method you can think of. Social engineering, phishing, physical intrusion, network exploitation, whatever works. The only rules are, don't cause permanent damage, don't exfiltrate actual classified data if you gain access to it, and document everything you do so we can understand how you did it." "That's a pretty broad mandate," I said, flipping through the paperwork. "Most companies put more restrictions on penetration tests." "Most companies aren't defending against nation-state actors," Robert replied. "We need to know if someone really determined could get into our systems. And we need to know what they could access if they did. Our CEO, Richard Castellano, has personally authorized this assessment. He's taking our security very seriously after some recent concerns." "What kind of concerns?" Robert hesitated, then said, "We've had some anomalies. Network traffic that doesn't quite make sense, access logs with small irregularities, nothing concrete enough to call it a breach, but enough to make us worried. We've done internal investigations and haven't found anything, which is why we're bringing in an outsider. Fresh eyes, someone who thinks like an attacker. He pulled out another document. This is your target list. We want you to attempt to access these specific systems and data repositories. If you can get into any of them, we need to know how and what you can see once you're in. I looked at the list. It included their email system, their internal file servers, their development environment, their customer database, their financial systems, and most concerning something called Project Nightfall that was only identified by name with no other description. What's Project Nightfall? I asked. That's classified, Robert said. But if you manage to access it, you'll understand why we're so concerned about security. Let's just say it's our most sensitive project, and a breach there would be catastrophic. He stood up. You'll be given an office space and whatever equipment you need. Your point of contact is me, but only through secure channels. We've set up an encrypted messaging system for you to report your findings. Check in with me at the end of each day with an update on what you've tried and what you've discovered. Over the first week, I did what I always did at the start of a penetration test, reconnaissance. I mapped out their network architecture, identified their external-facing systems, researched their employees on LinkedIn and social media, looked for any publicly available information that might be useful. I sent phishing emails to some employees to see if I could get credentials. I tried various technical exploits against their web applications and network infrastructure. Meridian security was good. Really good. Better than most organizations I tested. My phishing emails were getting caught by their filters or employees were reporting them to IT. Their network was properly segmented, their patches were up to date, their applications were following security best practices. After a week, I'd found a few minor vulnerabilities, nothing that would give me meaningful access. I reported this to Robert each evening through the encrypted messaging system. He seemed pleased that their security was holding up but encouraged me to keep trying, to think more creatively. So I did. I started focusing on the physical security side. I'd observed that employees often held doors open for each other rather than making everyone badge in separately. I'd noticed that the security guards changed shifts at predictable times and that there was a brief window during the changeover when they were less attentive. I'd identified that the janitorial staff came in after hours and had access to most areas of the building. On the 10th day of my engagement, I came in early around 5:30 a.m. dressed in clothing similar to what the janitorial staff wore, carrying a bucket with cleaning supplies. I waited near the employee entrance until I saw someone badging in, then walked quickly behind them while carrying on a fake phone conversation, looking distracted. The person held the door for me without thinking twice about it. I was in. I went to an area of the building I wasn't normally authorized to access, the executive floor where the C-suite offices were located. It was early enough that no one was around yet. I found a network port in an empty conference room and plugged in a small device I'd prepared, essentially a tiny computer that would give me remote access to the internal network from this privileged location. Then I cleaned some windows for a few minutes in case anyone saw me on the cameras, and left the building through a side exit. From my apartment that evening, I connected to the device I'd planted and suddenly had access to Meridian's internal network from a trusted location. This was the breakthrough I'd needed. Over the next several hours, I carefully explored their systems, moving laterally through the network, escalating privileges, accessing file shares and databases. I found the email system and could read internal communications. I found financial records, customer contracts, employee personal information, everything. And then, buried in a restricted directory that required elevated privileges to access, I found Project Nightfall. It was a set of encrypted files, dozens of them, with cryptic names that didn't reveal their contents. But there was also a README file that wasn't encrypted, presumably for anyone who had legitimate access to the project. I opened the README file, and what I read made my blood run cold. Project Nightfall was a cyber weapon. Not a defensive tool, an actual offensive weapon designed to infiltrate and destroy critical infrastructure. According to the documentation, it had already been deployed against targets in 3 different countries, causing widespread blackouts, telecommunications failures, and even some deaths when hospital systems went down. And according to the README file, the targets weren't enemy nations. They were allies. The project documentation described attacks against infrastructure in the UK, Germany, and Japan, made to look like they'd been carried out by other actors, Russia, China, North Korea, as a way to manipulate geopolitical tensions and justify increased defense spending. I sat there staring at my screen, unable to process what I was reading. This wasn't a defense project. This was an act of war, or multiple acts of war, being carried out under the cover of a legitimate defense contractor, with attacks being false flagged to implicate other countries. I immediately thought about the Stuxnet worm and other state-sponsored cyber weapons I'd read about. But those had been directed at actual adversaries. This was something else entirely: attacks against allied nations for what appeared to be purely financial and political motives. My hands were shaking as I took screenshots of the README file and some of the directory listings, being careful not to open the actual encrypted files since I didn't want to trigger any alarms. I needed evidence of what I'd found, but I also needed to be smart about this. I disconnected from the network and spent the next hour pacing around my apartment, trying to figure out what to do. I was legally obligated to report my findings to Robert Huang. That was the whole point of the penetration test. But what I'd found wasn't a security vulnerability. It was evidence of serious crimes. War crimes, potentially. If I reported it through official channels, what would happen? Would they just thank me for finding it and then make sure no one else could access it? Would they claim it was classified and that I'd broken the law by accessing it, even though accessing their systems was literally what they'd hired me to do? I decided I needed to document everything first, create a backup of the evidence somewhere safe, and then figure out my next move. I spent the next day acting normal, going into the Meridian office, working on other aspects of the penetration test, checking in with Robert through the encrypted messaging system but not mentioning what I'd found. I said I was still working on gaining deeper access and would have a major update soon. That night, I went back into their network through my planted device and copied more files from the Project Nightfall directory, including some of the encrypted ones. I also accessed Robert Huang's email account. I had the privileges now to access anything and started reading through his messages. What I found there was even worse. There were emails between Robert and the CEO, Richard Castellano, discussing the penetration test. But they weren't discussing it as a legitimate security assessment. They were discussing it as a way to identify if someone had already broken into their systems and accessed Project Nightfall. One email from Richard to Robert, dated 2 weeks before I'd been hired, said, "We need to know if our systems have been compromised, but we can't investigate too openly or we'll tip off whoever might be inside. Hire an external penetration tester, give them broad access, and see if they find anything related to Nightfall. If they do, we'll know we have a leak. If they don't, we're probably clean." Another email from Robert to Richard, dated 1 week after I'd started, "Brenner is good, maybe too good. He's being very thorough. We should have a plan for what to do if he finds it." Richard's response, "We have a plan. Trust me, if he finds it, the problem will be handled." He signed an NDA that gives us legal cover to respond with extreme prejudice to any breach of confidentiality. And we have people who can make sure he doesn't become a liability. I felt my stomach drop as I read that exchange. Respond with extreme prejudice. Make sure he doesn't become a liability. They were talking about killing me. This wasn't a legitimate security assessment. This was a trap. They'd hired me to see if I could find their illegal project, and if I did, they were planning to make sure I couldn't tell anyone about it. I immediately started taking screenshots of everything: the emails, the Project Nightfall files, anything I could think of that would prove what I'd found. I uploaded it all to an encrypted cloud storage account that wasn't connected to any of my real identities. Then I grabbed my laptop, threw some clothes in a bag, got in my car, and drove. I didn't know where I was going, I just knew I needed to get far away from Seattle before they realized I'd found what I'd found. I was about 3 hours south, somewhere in Oregon, when my phone started buzzing with calls from Robert Huang. Then text messages. Then emails. All asking where I was, saying we needed to meet urgently, asking if everything was okay. I didn't respond. I turned off my phone, removed the SIM card, and threw it out the window somewhere on I-5. I paid cash for a motel room in a small town and tried to figure out what to do next. I couldn't go to the police. What would I even tell them? I'd broken into a company's computer systems and found classified documents that allegedly showed they were committing cyber attacks against allies. They'd arrest me for computer crimes before they'd investigate Meridian. Plus, if Meridian had the kind of government connections that would allow them to carry out something like Project Nightfall, they probably had enough influence to make any investigation disappear. I couldn't go to the media directly, I had no credibility, and without being able to verify the encrypted files, they might just think I was making it up or had been fed disinformation. I thought about reaching out to WikiLeaks or one of the other organizations that specialized in classified leaks, but I knew that would paint a target on my back even bigger than the one that was probably already there. For the first few days, I just kept moving, staying in different cheap motels, paying cash for everything, trying not to leave a digital trail. I monitored news sites obsessively, looking for any stories about Meridian or about me, wondering if they'd reported me to the authorities for stealing data or breaking my NDA. But there was nothing. Radio silence. Which was almost more terrifying than if they'd gone public with accusations against me. Silence meant they were dealing with this quietly. Permanently. About a week into my running, I was staying in a motel in Idaho when I saw a news story that made me realize how much danger I was actually in. A man named James Chen, a cybersecurity researcher from Portland, had died in what police were calling a random mugging gone wrong. He'd been shot twice in an alley behind a restaurant where he'd been having dinner. I knew James. Not well, but we'd been at some of the same security conferences, had some mutual professional contacts. And according to the article, he'd recently been doing contract work for a defense contractor in Seattle. The article didn't name the company, but I knew. It had to be Meridian. And James had probably found the same thing I'd found, or something similar. And now he was dead. I realized I couldn't just keep running indefinitely. Eventually, they'd find me. They had resources I couldn't match, access to surveillance systems, databases, maybe even intelligence agency contacts. I needed to do something proactive. I needed to make sure that if they killed me, the information would still get out. I needed a dead man's switch. I spent the next week setting one up. I created multiple encrypted archives of all the data I'd stolen from Meridian, including the emails, the Project Nightfall documentation, and the encrypted files I'd copied. I set up a system where I had to check in every 48 hours by entering a password on a specific website I'd created. If I failed to check in, the system would automatically send the encrypted archives to a list of journalists, cybersecurity researchers, civil liberties organizations, and even some foreign intelligence services that would have an interest in knowing about US cyberattacks against their countries. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. If Meridian killed me, the information would get out, and killing me would actually make things worse for them, not better. I also started trying to verify the encrypted files I'd stolen. I didn't have the encryption keys to open them directly, but I had the file metadata and some of the associated documentation. I reached out through anonymous channels to some former intelligence community contacts, people who'd left government work and might be willing to help, asking vague questions about cyber operations and specific code names I'd seen in the Project Nightfall documentation. The responses I got back were concerning. One former NSA analyst told me, cryptically, "If you're asking about what I think you're asking about, you need to be very careful. That's some serious shit, and the people involved don't fuck around." Another contact, someone who'd worked in military intelligence, simply said, "Burn your laptop, throw your phone in a river, and disappear. Don't tell me anything else." So I knew I was right. Project Nightfall was real, it was as bad as I thought, and the people behind it were dangerous. About a month into my running, I was staying in a motel in Kansas when someone knocked on my door at 2 a.m. I'd been half asleep, but I was instantly awake and terrified. I looked through the peephole and saw two men in casual clothes standing outside my door. They didn't look like motel staff or police. They looked like exactly the kind of people you'd send to make someone disappear. I grabbed my laptop bag and went out the window, literally climbed out the bathroom window while they were knocking on the front door. I heard them kick in the door as I was running through the parking lot to my car. I drove for 6 hours straight, not stopping except for gas, paid in cash, at stations without cameras if I could find them. I ditched that car in Missouri and bought another one off Craigslist, again paying cash, using a fake ID I'd had made. That was 2 weeks ago. Since then, I've been even more careful, moving every day or two, never staying anywhere long enough to establish a pattern. I've been growing a beard, wearing glasses I don't need, changing my appearance as much as I can. But I know I can't keep this up forever. Eventually, I'll make a mistake. Or they'll get lucky, or my money will run out. So I've made a decision. I'm going to release the information myself, in a controlled way, working with journalists who know how to handle this kind of story and who can verify the data before publishing. I've made contact with an investigative reporter at a major newspaper who specializes in intelligence community stories. I've sent them some of the documentation I have, enough to verify that it's real without giving them everything up front. They're working on verifying it now, cross-referencing it with their own sources. They promised me anonymity and source protection, which is good, though I'm not sure how much protection that will really provide against the kind of people who are after me. The story should break in the next week or two. Once it does, either I'll be safer because the information is public and there's no point in killing me, or I'll be in even more danger because they'll want revenge. I honestly don't know which. What I do know is that Project Nightfall needs to be exposed. The people behind it need to be held accountable. And other whistleblowers and penetration testers need to know that not every security assessment is legitimate, that sometimes you're being set up as a patsy or a scapegoat, that the company hiring you might be the threat you're supposed to be protecting against. I think about that first day at Meridian a lot, sitting in that conference room with Robert Huang, being given carte blanche to hack their systems. It felt like the opportunity of a lifetime, huge money, an incredible technical challenge, a chance to test my skills against a really secure target. But it was a setup from the beginning. They hired me specifically because I was good enough to find what they were hiding, and they'd already decided what to do if I found it. I was never supposed to walk away from that job. James Chen didn't. I'm sure there have been others. The thing that makes me angriest isn't even that they tried to kill me. It's that they corrupted something I loved. Penetration testing is supposed to be about helping organizations improve their security, about being an ethical hacker working on the right side. They turned it into a weapon, using the trust and access we're given to identify threats to their criminal operation. How many other penetration testers have found things they weren't supposed to find? How many have been silenced before they could tell anyone? How many security professionals are unknowingly working for criminal organizations under the cover of legitimate defense contracts? I don't have answers to those questions. All I know is my own story, and I'm telling it now because I might not get another chance. If you're reading this and I've disappeared, or if you see a news story about me dying in some accident or random crime, you'll know what really happened. And you'll know that the data I collected is out there, in the hands of people who will publish it. If you're reading this and you work in cybersecurity, particularly if you do penetration testing or security consulting for defense contractors or government agencies, be careful. Ask questions about what you're being asked to test and why. Don't assume that everyone hiring you has good intentions. And for God's sake, set up a dead man's switch before you start any engagement that involves classified or sensitive data. I got into this field because I thought I was one of the good guys, helping to make the digital world more secure. I still think most people in this industry are good guys trying to do the right thing. But there are exceptions, and sometimes those exceptions have a lot of resources and very few ethical boundaries. I was hired to hack my own company as a security test. What I found was evidence that they were literally attacking allied nations and causing deaths through cyberterrorism. And when I found it, I became a target myself. Now I'm in hiding, running for my life, trying to make sure the truth gets out before they silence me permanently. I used to think that being a white hat hacker meant you were always on the safe side of the law, that as long as you followed the rules and worked within the system, you'd be protected. I was naive. The system can be corrupted just like any computer system, and sometimes the people you're working for are the actual threat. I don't know how this ends for me. Maybe the story breaks and I can come out of hiding. Maybe I can testify before Congress or cooperate with legitimate law enforcement agencies who aren't compromised. Maybe I can eventually go back to having a normal life, though I doubt it will ever really be normal again. Or maybe they find me before the story breaks. Maybe I end up like James Chen, another cybersecurity professional who died in a random act of violence that wasn't random at all. Maybe this Reddit post is the only record that will exist of what really happened. Either way, the truth about Project Nightfall is going to come out. I've made sure of that. And even if they kill me, they can't kill the information. It's redundant, it's distributed, it's in multiple hands, and it's set up to automatically release if I disappear. That's the thing about information in the digital age. Once it's out there, you can't contain it. You can try to discredit it, you can try to spin it, but you can't make it disappear. And the people at Meridian Solutions are about to learn that the hard way. So if you're reading this, Richard Castellano and Robert Huang, know that you've already lost. The information is out there. The journalists have it. The verification is happening. And in a week or two, everyone is going to know what Project Nightfall really was and what you did. You can kill me, but you can't stop what's coming. And to everyone else reading this, pay attention to the news over the next few weeks. When you see stories about a defense contractor called Meridian Solutions and cyber attacks against allied nations, you'll know it was real. You'll know that I'm not crazy or making this up. You'll know that sometimes the people we trust to protect us are actually the ones we need protection from. And maybe, just maybe, my death, if it comes to that, will mean something. Maybe it will lead to reforms, to oversight, to accountability for the people and organizations that think they can operate above the law. Or maybe not. Maybe nothing will change and this will just be another story that gets buried in the news cycle, forgotten within a week. But at least I'll know I tried. At least I'll know that when I had the chance to do the right thing, even when it was dangerous and even when it cost me everything, I did it. That's more than I can say for the people at Meridian Solutions. I'm going to post this now, and then I'm going to move to a new location, and I'm going to keep checking in every 48 hours on my dead man's switch. And I'm going to keep running until either the story breaks or they catch up with me. Wish me luck. I think I'm going to need it. Update: it's been 3 days since I wrote the above. The story just broke. It's on the front page of the Washington Post. Defense contractor allegedly behind cyber attacks on allied nations is the headline. They verified everything. Project Nightfall is real, the attacks happened, and Meridian Solutions is at the center of it. The FBI has announced an investigation. Congress is calling for hearings. The company's offices have been raided. I still don't know if I'm safe, but at least now the truth is out there. The information can't be contained anymore. James Chen's death is also being reinvestigated in light of the revelations. Maybe his family will finally get justice. As for me, I'm still in hiding. My lawyer is negotiating with federal prosecutors about immunity in exchange for my testimony. They want me to come in, but I'm not ready to trust that yet. Not until I'm absolutely sure that the people who wanted me dead are in custody and can't get to me. But at least I'm still alive. And the truth is out. That's something.